Good. All right, we're going to call the B&G committee meeting to order. Really quick for the trustees, I've been asked to remind you to pull your mic close to you when you speak, primarily because otherwise it sounds like we're mumbling and we're illiterate, and so we would like people to think otherwise. Did I cover everything on that? We're good?
Yes, I wouldn't.
Okay.
I don't know. I would say illiterate, but we would like to hear the whole conversation because, as I mentioned yesterday, staff does go back and review the meetings, and it's more helpful when we can clearly hear what every
Marcel,
trustee
tomato,
said.
tomato. Okay, look, you characterize it how you want. Okay, so I've got a couple of speaker slips today. Let's see. Ted, Johnny Tran, Susan Youngflesh, Cynthia. Is this? It's bad enough that your CEO calls me up and whines about staff not being able to give presentations, and then you guys turn around and give me speaker slips. This is unacceptable. All right, let's start with the first action item. First action item, staff's recommendation to approve the disbursement of the 13th check and the Corbett settlement payments. I think, Ted, you're going to speak about that. Before you get up here really quick, the 13th check was an optional benefit created by the city. When the city tried to take it away, surprisingly enough, they got sued. As a result of a settlement, we now make that 13th payment if certain conditions are met, which Ted will enlighten us about. If those conditions are met and we pay the 13th check, we also have to pay the Corbett settlement. Ted, please go ahead and fill us in on the details.
I think you've said it all.
No, go ahead.
Staff recommends that the board authorize the disbursement of the 13th check benefits, and since we will be dispersing the 13th check, the Corbett settlement benefits along with it. The city municipal code specifies a calculation necessary in order to disperse the 13th check. Corbett is accrued for, but only paid in any fiscal year where the 13th check is actually paid. So as a result of having realized investment gains of $345.4 million, offset by interest and expenses of $169, the amount is more than sufficient to pay the 13th check amount of accrued as of June 30th, 2018 of $6.8 million.
Any questions for Ted? Hearing none, can we get the vote, the motion buttons up? I've made the motion because nobody else did.
Ready to vote. All votes are in.
All right, and that motion carries 6-0. Item number 2, staff's recommendation to approve the 2019 drop interest crediting rates and to revise board rules 6.1 and 6.4. Ted's also going to comment on this. Basically, this is a cleanup provision based upon the Muni Code and the board rules. These are predetermined interest rates. None of this is in our control. We just vote on it. Ted, go ahead.
Staff recommends the approval of the 2019 drop participation interest crediting rate of 2.7% and the drop annuity rate of 3.0% effective January 1st, 2019, based upon criteria as developed by this board back in 2013. This is an increase from 2.0 and 2.8 respectively in the previous year.
I've done an independent financial analysis of this and determined that you're off by 0.002% in the drop interest crediting rate.
What do you have to say about that, Ted?
Can I go back to my desk now?
Absolutely, knock yourself out. I'm kidding. Does anybody have any real questions for Ted? Ted, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to approve the resolution?
Ready to vote. All votes are in.
And that motion passes 6-0. Finally, I have 3 items that were not specifically, where I was not specifically required to allow someone to speak. So that's items 3, 4, and 5, which basically means they're not important enough to talk about, and I can implement my go-to policy of let's just vote on them. So the number 3 is the staff's recommendation to revise the investment committee charter. If there are no questions from the trustees, No additional comments from staff. Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the resolution?
Ready to vote? Okay, go. All
Who's the-
votes are in.
And that motion passes 6-0. Item number 4, staff's recommendation to revise the settlement of claims or lawsuits policy, statement of policies under Proposition 162 and City Charter, travel policy, whistleblower policy, confidentiality of member information policy, and insider personal trading policy. Unless there is any questions from the committee or comments from staff, seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the resolution?
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And that motion passes 6-0. Item number 5, staff's recommendation to adopt Board Rule 1.10 and revise Division 6 and 9.6. Any questions from the committee? Any comments from staff? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the resolution?
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And that motion passes 6-0. So now we move to the review and purchase of insurance. Johnny has a very long and drawn-out proposal and presentation for us.
Shouldn't be too bad. Thank you. Good morning. Each year, we take this time to review the insurances that cover SDCERS, and also take this time to renew any policies that may be lapsing or discuss purchasing new insurance. This year, we've taken a little more in-depth approach at the chairperson's recommendation by hiring another party, an outside attorney consultant, to take a look at our coverage, any coverage we don't have, and opine on that. So we hired Jim Voorhees from the Nossaman firm, who we have an existing relationship in different other legal matters, and I will interject his comments throughout this presentation. I want to break up this presentation in 2 parts, if I will.
If I can
Yes.
just really quick, so that everybody kind of understands what you and I had spoken about and why we went to a consultant. Traditionally, in corporate America, when you are purchasing insurance, usually you just go to your broker and you renew your policies. It's a good practice every few years to have a consultant come in, take a look at your coverage, take a look at gaps, figure out, is there anything that you're missing? In a perfect world, hopefully that consultant comes back and says, hey, everything you're doing is great, nothing else needs to be done. But sometimes you find that there are gaps, there are problems, or there's other coverage that you can add for the board to consider. So that was the impetus of why we were doing that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Thanasi. I'm going to break the presentation into 2 parts. The first part I'll handle. I'll talk about the insurances that cover SDCERS and insurances that a staff is looking into within its authority. The second part, I'll bring in our longtime insurance brokers from Marsh McLennan, John Niedenhofer, and David Williams, who are behind me. In that presentation, part of the presentation, I'll have them sit up here. Okay. First, let's talk about what insurance SDCERS relies on from the city of San Diego. The city of San Diego is self-insured for workers' compensation for all of its employees. That includes SDCERS employees. That includes the trustees to the extent that they are working for SDCERS at the time of any injury. We also rely on the city's property coverage policy for anything that should happen in the building should we lose some property, and we have $25 million in coverage through the city. We also have coverage through the city as an additional insured on their master crime policy. So should an employee of SDCERS commit embezzlement, this is a policy that would kick in for us. One thing that Mr. Voorhees pointed out to me in this policy is that it includes a fraudulent transfer coverage or insurance coverage for $250,000. So should one of our staff members inadvertently click a link, or I'm sorry, more so be duped into paying a transfer that is fraudulent, this insurance would cover us for the maximum amount. This arrangement is similar to other systems. A lot of county systems rely on the county exclusively for their insurances and coverage. SDCERS has a combination of this. Let's talk about what insurances SDCERS purchases on its own. And this is, we've had fiduciary insurance for over 10 years now. John and David are going to go more in depth about that coverage, but very quickly here, we have 25 million in aggregate. That includes defense costs, includes the duty to defend any claim, and our choice of representation. So that coverage covers SDCERS as an entity. You as trustee should you be sued individually, and as well as the officers of SDCERS. This year, SDCERS also purchased 2 other types of coverage, general commercial liability insurance. We did that because it became more clear to staff that the city's policy wasn't adequate, wasn't covering in the way we needed to. So we purchased 25 million in coverage this year.
Wait.
Yes.
2 million or 25 million?
2 million in commercial liability. We also purchased non-owned hired auto liability insurance. So the majority of our travel, I guess, for the trustees and also for staff is we drive our own cars to conferences or whatnot. The city self-insures for employees travel then. Staff thought it was prudent to do that, to buy $1 million in coverage to cover any liability that should happen when staff or trustees travel. I do want to talk about some other insurances that we're exploring at the recommendation of the consultant. The consultant was concerned with, well, let me back a second, take a step back. He had some comments about our fiduciary coverage. He thought the 25 million was a little high and wanted us to look into that, and staff is going to look into that. He also believed that the way we've arranged our insurance is more catastrophic insurance, and I agree with him. We have a $2 million retention level, and he thinks the premium is high. He's a new consultant that doesn't understand or isn't very familiar with SDCERS' history. And so we understand as staff that our high premium is a result of SDCERS' past. And so, but we will be looking into this to see if there is a disconnect between the premium that we are recommending this year again, and then moving forward with those points that Mr. Voorhees pointed out. Other insurances that Mr. Voorhees suggests is that we look at an umbrella policy, something to add excess coverage to our fiduciary as well as our commercial. And we've gotten some quotes. They're not quite finalized, but it looks like that coverage will be around $2,000 for additional 1 or 2 million. That's something within Mr. Rodemaker's discretion. And so should we decide that those policies are good, we will go ahead and purchase those. We're also looking at employment practices liability insurance coverage. That's coverage for any claims against SDCERS and individuals because of sexual harassment or discrimination claims, things that aren't covered by any existing policy.
Does that include wage and hour claims?
I don't know. I'm assuming you want me to look into that?
Normally it covers it, but so I'd like to know if that's going to be part of that.
John or David, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Okay.
it would not.
Would not, but would you like to let's look at that
Well, and
separately?
I think Bobby's also suggested maybe wrongful termination coverage. It would be nice to know what coverage is available and what's out there.
Okay. Thank you. This is why we have this meeting. Thank you.
Also, Johnny, I just want to make sure that the board understands on the $25 million of coverage of fiduciary insurance. There's 2 ways that insurance can cover. It can either cover you can have liability coverage and defense is paid for separately, or defense is paid for out of the policy limits of the policy. It makes a huge difference potentially on the liability side, although I don't know that we would have cases bumping into 25 million. But I do want to point out, as I understand from you, Johnny, and I'd like you to confirm it for the board, that the $25 million, any defense costs, will reduce the liability coverage.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And John and David will comment on the request that we perhaps purchase a separate coverage for defense costs so it doesn't eat into the 25 million in liability. Okay. Concerning the employment practices liability, we are looking into that and we are gathering quotes, but again, that looks like it's going to be within lower than $50,000 within Greg's authority. So we're looking at the market and determining if that's viable. Related to that, as you know, Government Code 1090 prohibits this board or staff from entering into a contract that we have a personal benefit from. And so my concern is that if we purchase certain types of insurances that end up benefiting us personally, as well as SDCERS, is there a conflict of interest? And I'm working with the Ethics Commission to work out those details.
Does anybody have any questions on that or want Johnny to elaborate on that?
Sure. So an example is if we bought employment practices liability insurance and I was the alleged harasser or discriminator and I was named in that lawsuit, and that coverage would cover me personally. We're looking into whether or not, if I was found liable for that, if the insurance would not cover me at that point. But there's an argument that the insurance helps me. So the thought is that I am helping buy insurance that covers me. And that would be the potential conflict.
And Bobby, the way that normally handles is that they defend on a reservation of rights. And if Johnny was the tortfeasor, which may be less likely than me being the tortfeasor, but very likely, he would theoretically owe it back. So I don't think that there's a conflict, but Johnny's going to look into that.
Does that answer your question?
If you're acting in the scope of your employment, and obviously it hadn't been adjudicated yet, it should be covered by your employer.
Absolutely. All
Right.
this insurance is in addition to what is statutorily required from an employer. So, Bobby, if you're acting within the course and scope of your duty, in a civil lawsuit, the government, the SDCERS, the city is required to defend and indemnify you. The question is whether or not we think as a board it's prudent to add some insurance to risk mitigate those costs.
Got it.
That's it as far as what insurance we have right now and the different insurances that we're exploring. I want to invite John and David up here to do the second part of the presentation. And what we have for you is a renewal of your fiduciary policy, as well as staff's recommendation and the broker's recommendation to purchase some cyber insurance. Sir, just drive right there.
So, gentlemen, I appreciate you coming by to explain to us why you sell us inadequate insurance at very high prices. I appreciate that. So thank you. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I want to just, before I dive into the slides, I want to just take a moment and applaud the use of a consultant. There is absolutely a vibrant role because, particularly for an organization like this, which doesn't neatly fit into the general business world that drives the bulk of insurance. I can elaborate on any questions you have about the employment practices liability coverage, individual defense, or wage and hour, or anything like that. If you'd like, I can just give a summary that may be pertinent to this in a moment.
If you wouldn't mind giving a short summary, and I'm big on brevity, so please.
Super. Wrongful termination, sexual harassment, and discrimination are the core of the coverage. It used to be wage and hour was part of it. To elaborate on that, wage and hour claims tend to be for allegations. They tend to be class-driven for groups of employees where the claim is they've been misclassified and denied breaks or abused in the terms of the restaurant industry. A lot of people are coded as management, where they're taking out the trash, and it's to get around the hourly thing. So there's been a long history of that. It became incredibly litigious and expensive for the insurance industry, and so it's very selectively and rarely offered. If you have a large swath of hourly employees, we can certainly look into it. It is not included in the terms that are extant. I also want to comment that the consultant comments on areas to investigate insurance align with discussions David and I have been having with Johnny as well as Melanie for several years now. And we've been focusing on areas we understand you're indemnified by the city. We also understand that sometimes it requires a vote and public optics to grant that indemnity. and it may be awkward. And so we focused on the areas that there could be discomfort. An allegation of sexual harassment, for example, may be very difficult to gracefully get to indemnity. So it may be an area to look that much harder at insurance. It's just sort of the comment I would make on it. So we've been focusing on those types of insurance where either the city does not cover you and would have to indemnify out of cash, or at any rate, areas that indemnity may be called into question. Crime is another example where we have seen that sort of dynamic be publicly awkward. So with that, any questions?
Nope, go ahead.
And I completely agree on the employment practices. The way the coverage works for defensive individuals, there are always allegations that are of horrible conduct, egregious conduct. That's the nature of the allegations in litigation. The coverage would respond with defense of the organization as well as any employee up until such time as excluded conduct is established by final adjudication. And excluded conduct would be things like criminal wrongful acts, et cetera. Does that make sense? Any questions?
I think you're at the, if you go up,
Thank you.
all the way up.
So these are the areas I'll be running through. First, just taking a step back, and I'm talking now about the trustee liability. So it's called fiduciary in some settings. If it were in the civil area, the public company or privately owned company, non-governmental area, this would be very fundamentally similar to what is widely known as D&O insurance, director and officer liability insurance. There are three components to it. The first is the most important and meaningful to the trustees. And this is an area that has two types of coverage. It's either for, it can serve as excess or can drop down as, and be primary with no deductible if there is no indemnification available for an allegation of a breach of a fiduciary duty in the course and scope of duties defined.
Let me interrupt you for a quick second. Johnny, this is the portion that the trustees pay for individually if we want it. Is that correct? Side A.
I think what you're saying is when the waiver of recourse that you're talking about,
Yeah.
that's a little different. So you can explain the waiver of recourse if you want, or follow me up, John. But this is coverage for you as trustee, but the law requires that if a public retirement board purchase fiduciary insurance, that if you're actually found liable for a breach of fiduciary duty, that insurance company has the ability to subrogate or try to obtain those funds from you personally. The waiver of recourse insurance is a contract that you have directly with the insurance company that says in the rare instance that could happen, you individually are purchasing a policy to preclude that insurance company from doing that. So that's separate and independent of what we're talking about today.
I don't see any questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Charlie, you're in the queue. Charlie is not in the queue. That's a figment of my imagination. Go ahead.
So really this is the core purpose of this insurance is found in the Side A. And the coverage is agnostic to why indemnity is elusive, whether there's a regulatory prohibition, a discretionary vote to withhold it, whether there's an insolvency, the coverage doesn't matter. What it does is undertake the defense of the individuals and serve as your advocate to go pursue indemnity on your behalf. Side B is a much more prevalent type of litigation, and that is if trustees or officers are sued personally, then the policy reimburses those costs. Side C is for the organizational entity itself. If there's corporate liability alleged, then the defense of the organization as well as all employees is incorporated within that coverage grant. This is a graphic depiction of the same thing. The green drop-down arrow is to demonstrate that Side A can work in two ways. It can be excess, or it can be drop down and be primary if there is, and the coverage will have a grant in it that says if there is a demand for indemnity that's not met within 60 days, this insurance shall defend covered persons on a primary basis with no deductible. Any questions?
No one's in the queue? Go ahead.
So Johnny and Melanie asked us to please elaborate a little bit this year on some of the coverage features. So this is a very definitionally driven coverage. So you have an insuring agreement that talks about, and you have three of them, A, B, and C, and they talk about a lot of defined terms. This insurance shall respond to allegation or claims, defined term, for loss, defined term, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are exclusions. And so it's our job to narrow the exclusions to the maximum extent possible and broaden the definitions to the extent that it's beneficial to coverage. Some of the most prominent exclusions include things like fraud or criminal acts. Very importantly, this is the narrowest language that is available commercially. By narrow, I mean the coverage is very, very broad in the defense of individuals. If you are alleged to have committed fraud, you will still be defended. The policy will reimburse defense costs and stand behind you up until such a time as there is a final, non-appealable judgment of that excluded conduct. And further, and this is where it's the narrowest language possible, it has to be in the underlying action. This is actually a possible rub because if there's a separate concurrent criminal action and there's a guilty plea entered, it hasn't been established in the underlying action. So you could have this perverse circumstance where you could have a bad actor who's defended by your insurance who's already admitted guilt to fraud. We can narrow it, but it's our job, unless we're directed by our clients, to maximize the breadth of the coverage and the scope of the coverage and not value judge discretionarily where to trim it. That's a public policy consideration. I defer to you guys if you want us to narrow that, but this is the broadest language, and this is the only arguably contentious area of this insurance. Other exclusions are for bodily injury, property damage, workers' comp, disability discrimination. There are other types of insurance for that. Also benefits owed. So this is a very important area. If there is a litigation that you owed certain benefits, didn't pay them, and it's adjudicated, and it is determined that you did owe some specific quantum of benefits, the policy will not pay that because that should have come out of the corpus of the funds that you are the stewards of. Does that make sense? Any questions? Is this on point? Okay, thanks. So you currently purchase $25 million in limits. I agree with the consultant. We have talked about this year after year, whether this is too much. It's, when you benchmark how much limit you have versus assets under management, you are probably in the third quartile above the median. There's a reason for that, and that is because back in the 06 through 08, 2008 era, the litigation with the city, the withholding of indemnity, there's a history there that makes it understandable that you would find comfort in arguably overbuying. There have been many efforts over the years. We came in, I think we were first hired in 2010 or 11, and restructured the coverage and reduced the price considerably. But we have undertaken many efforts in conjunction with staff to work with the city to try and get affirmative reassurance of indemnity, and that has remained elusive.
If I can ask a question on that. So if the city was willing to indemnify SDCERS or to agree to narrow what they could potentially complain about, we wouldn't necessarily need coverage this high. Is that the long and the short of it?
Yes, agreed. And secondly, I would further that and say, to the extent that you do have insurance, it should positively impact in a downward way the pricing.
Thank you.
And that's been explained repeatedly, including in person, to the city.
No, they obviously like the premium, so it's okay.
I will move down a slide. As part of the renewal process, we approach all viable insurers in this space. There's a little different mix. We don't have that granularity for you today. David can address any questions if you have them about which insurers we approached, how we select them, how we communicate the risk profile and articulate that, how we negotiate. But bottom line is our renewal recommendation would be to stay with the same portfolio of insurers. And I do want to take a pause and step back and say we have been through many years of dramatic decreases in premium because the 06 through 08 litigation or 09 litigation with the city, and of course the underlying litigation has gotten further away in the rearview mirror with non-recurrence. And so the risk profile arguably is dissipated. It's not fully alleviated. But meanwhile, last year you made the move to take on a much higher self-retained risk in the form of a higher deductible. And that was prudent and timely. The market has been shifting because of an increased spate of litigation in this whole sector. And not including you guys, but there are a lot of private as well as public asset managers. The rate of litigation has gone up dramatically, and the cost of defense has gone up, if anything, even more dramatically as a proportion. And so the market has been hardening. That is our euphemism for basically prices firming, going up, and terms and negotiability of terms narrowing and getting more constricted. And if you had increased that deductible this year, you would have had much less of a noticeable effect in price reduction. So it was very timely election recommendation by staff and election by council the trustees last year. This year, you are seeing a very nominal decrease in premium. The coverage is fundamentally the same. It's the same portfolio of insurers. There were no viable alternates that were even remotely price competitive to these options. So we'd like it to be lower. We have argued vigorously, negotiated, and this is the best result that we could drive in the market, given the market conditions that have shifted.
Are you saying the hard market is the reason why it only dropped $1,300?
Yes, that's the primary consideration underpinning this. If it was this time last year and the coverage was as it's structured, it would have gone down 10, 12%, I would estimate. But the market right now overall is going up 10, 12%. So it's kind of gone up to meet you, if you will.
Out of curiosity, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We pushed you hard last year, and maybe even the year before. And I just want to say, I don't think pushing harder right now sounds like it would bear any fruit. And we've captured the benefit that we can from this for now, and it's just a matter of waiting for the market to soften and for our history to get older.
I agree. There are other levers you could pull. I think we would be very comfortable recommending reduction of that Chubb layer from 10 million excess to 5. And that would yield somewhere in the range of a $25,000 to $28,000 savings, we estimate. It's still plenty of insurance. It stacks up very appropriately to peer benchmarking, but it's always hard to reduce your level of coverage. And I do think that I need to temper my very comfortable with recommending comment with the fact that you guys may not be immune to the precipitous rise in litigation kicked off largely by some of the DOL initiatives a couple years ago. So
DOL, Department of Labor?
right.
You're talking about moving the Chubb layer from, what is it now, 15? 10 to 5, 15?
Yeah, so it's now 10 million of limit excess of the 10 million underlying, and we would estimate it would save approximately $25,000 to $28,000 by trimming that to 5 million excess of 10, where that Hudson layer would drop down. There's a possibility that Hudson layer, sorry to interrupt, but that Hudson layer may go up several $1,000s, but
Will not offset the savings on the Chubb layer.
Oh, I know.
But you'd still have the same total maximum amount. You'd just configure your stack differently.
You could do so. What I was suggesting is leaving the Hudson at 5 million. So instead of being a 5 million A-side excess of 20, it would be a 5 million A-side excess of 15. That's an option for
What's the magic to 25 million? Where does it come from?
There
Is
was
it
a
to
lot
fill
of
in kind
benchmarking. When we were first retained in 2010 or 2011, we did, we did a lot of analysis. We looked deeply at litigation. Staff did as well, Johnny's predecessor. We pulled on all kinds of independent benchmark analyses, and there was a range of peer-driven limits as well as litigation pattern-driven projected loss scenarios, if you will. And this was on the conservative, i.e. moderately higher end of that spectrum.
So today, would 20 million rather than 25 be more in the middle of the pack? Or has it gone up?
Limit purchases will start to go up as a trailing indicator of litigation going up.
Yeah.
So I would imagine the peer is going to come to meet you pretty soon. There is sorry to interrupt, there's another dimension to the answer about the limit selection. When we were first retained, the prior broker had structured a pure A-side program, and I don't recall if it was 10 or 15 million in limit, and I believe it was in the $750,000 range, and it had a full prior act exclusion, meaning that any claim that related to any events prior to the first date of the insurance being in place was not covered, and by definition, all your litigation does that. So we restructured the program, got rid of the prior act exclusion, added coverage to include defense for individuals, as well as the entity, as well as indemnifiable loss for premium savings at the $25 million option. So there was actually a premium savings yielding much higher limits and much broader coverage. And I believe that probably was a factor in the decision to arrive at that limit, because there was no increase, it was a decrease. You got a lot more for a considerably less premium. Is that responsive?
Yeah.
Johnny.
Trustee had a question if they could separate the coverage to cover defense costs and not eat into the 25 million total coverage. Can you comment on that?
Thank you for the reminder. I do not believe in this space. We've never seen it. I do not believe underwriters would agree to it because of concerns of the moral hazard. Legal rates in this space over the last 6 or 7 years have gone from about $500 to $600 an hour to we've seen as high as $1,600 an hour for litigator rates for top tier. There's an argument you're getting what you're paying for, because we've seen some incredibly effective lawyering, but the costs go up astronomically quickly.
That's not the San Diego market, though.
But the question is whether you want San Diego counsel in something.
It could be, Val. It could be. We can work together on this.
I know most of the really good lawyers in San Diego, and we've got some darn good labor and employment lawyers here that will work for half of that. So,
labor and employment, I completely agree. It's a fraction of those numbers. I'm talking about if there is a fiduciary claim. That's a highly specialized area, and the rates can get quite high. It's much like securities litigators. Those rates have darn near doubled in the last decade. Plus, discovery costs have gone up considerably with things like e-discovery, where just record searches have become very burdensome and costly for a third party to manage document production.
So that being the case, is the $25 million make more sense since litigation costs are going up, and so instead of it costing me $2 or $3 million, it's now costing me $3 to $6 million to try these cases? Does it make more sense to leave the coverage, or do you still recommend? Do you still have a high degree of confidence in your recommendation to reduce the Chubb layer?
Well, it's kind of a telling question to ask if defense can be outside. If defense is outside, which I don't believe would be the case, I believe your insurers, no insurer in this space would agree to it. If they would, we recommend reducing the limit, because probably half of your spend, if not more, is going to be in legal defense.
Even with defense within limits, I think it would be reasonable to reduce these limits to $20 million, given the scope of what trustees can even do in this organization. The only thing I'd be worried about is would be some sort of thing like what happened in 2006, and I don't view that as the kind of risk that our members should be paying a large premium for. So I'm comfortable going either way on this. But is it $25,000?
Call it 25 as an estimate. We'll
Be
tighten
offset by a few $1,000s, so maybe 20 net.
20 or greater would be the savings. I don't think it'd be 30. But
The only hesitation I have is, but we've got all volunteer trustees, and we're talking about protecting their personal assets for doing a volunteer job. And so $20,000 doesn't seem like an extraordinary amount to pay. On the other hand, I think we're overinsured. So go figure.
Although I am curious, your comment was that you think that our peer groups are rising, or will end up rising to meet where we are currently. And I mean, have you done any studies? Is that just sort of a gut feeling, or is that kind of the trend, or what do we?
It's 30 years of experience telling me that's just 18 to 24 months where it's going to end up, based on the litigation trends that we're seeing. And it usually takes 1 or 2 cycles of
Catch up.
this kind of dialogue to get comfortable allocating the funds.
Excuse me, may I ask a question?
Yeah, no. I'm sorry, go ahead, yes.
Tanasi, by the way, privately said something, so I'll put it on the record, which is if we reduce it now, it sounds like we'd likely have to just increase it again later to meet where the market's going. So it could be kind of a very short-term
Savings.
change.
Which is a great segue to my question, is that if we reduce the coverage now, and in some period or a number of periods in the future we want to increase that coverage again, would we still be viewed in the marketplace the same, or would there be adverse premium hikes, or is that an issue?
The market would not punish that, no.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, Val just said something, and it just kind of popped in the head. You say as a volunteer, we have, and then you were asking something earlier about chasing after the city to find certain indemnifications and stuff. I guess being on the board is as a volunteer, but the members here that are city employees, is that? I mean, I know in the MOUs there's a requirement that that police officers who's representing the police officers attend these meetings. Would that make a difference in the volunteer status for litigation?
I'm going to defer to Johnny first, unless he wants me to go first, but it's legal advice.
I'd have to look at your MOU specifically to answer that question, Tom. But in any sense, we've already established that risk management in the city considers trustees when they serve to be city employees. I don't know how that would change if you were a city employee that were a police officer
agree.
or not.
I think the city has both a contractual and statutory obligation to defend and indemnify the kinds of claims that we're insuring against. But I think what we're being advised is, think back to Mayor Filner. If the claim is one for sexual harassment, for example, the city may be very uncomfortable honoring the indemnity promise when that claim is pending. And so we might find ourselves without a city indemnity and in a lawsuit against the city to get it, which is also what happened in early 2000s when board members were individually sued for criminal misconduct, and the city didn't honor the indemnity. That could happen too. So it's really the defense. Because if it's proved that there was a criminal misconduct or conduct that's not insurable, willful or intentional misconduct, I suspect is probably not insurable once it's proved, and so you wouldn't get the indemnity for that, but you get a defense until it's proved, and then when the carrier is defending, it has an obligation under the insurance code to make reasonable efforts to settle the case against you. And so if it's a case that could go either way, as an insured, you'd be pressuring that carrier, your lawyer would be pressuring that carrier to settle the case before it gets through trial and there's a finding, which in most cases would happen if the offer, particularly if you've got a plaintiff who really isn't interested in your personal assets, they just want to get to the insurance. So it's great protection, and I think we need it. I'm just concerned that,
It's too high.
yeah, $25 million, that's a big claim.
So your efforts to get the information from the city, it's very likely the city's purposely being elusive.
Yeah, the city's in a tough spot. They feel like, and I'm projecting a bit here, but if you think back to the Gary-driven allegations, I believe the underlying allegations were very aggressively crafty, smart lawyering, where the allegations were that people may be employees, but because they benefited from their own decisions, they entered in a conflict zone that took them out of their capacity and out of the ability to be indemnified by the city. And so the way the allegations were drafted drove a wedge between the city and SDCERS.
Which is more likely to apply to someone who is an elected member than to an appointed member.
Okay.
My understanding is eventually the city did cover them. It just took many, many years. But eventually the city employees who were on the board, who were individually sued or individually charged with criminal acts, they eventually did get their attorney's fees and all that back from the city, but it took a very long time.
Not only did it take a long time, but it destroyed many of them financially, including through bankruptcy during that process. And so the difference with this is, the short answer to your question is, if you buy the insurance, or if the board buys the insurance, then the contract is between us and the insurance carrier pays. And so it gets that taken care of. We can deal with the city or who's responsible for it after the fact, but what's critical is in the moment of your need, somebody is defending you. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, there's another dynamic, which is, at least in the litigation that I'm in, the plaintiff finds out what your insurance policy's limits are. Yeah, and that tends to limit the claim. And I've found that sometimes you can settle a claim better if you have a lower limit and you have an eroding policy limit with defense costs. Sometimes that helps get cases resolved. So it's kind of an irony that you get better deals as a defendant when your insurance is less robust. Not that you want to plan for that.
Don't go to Vegas.
All right. Go ahead and continue, and just letting you know you've been talking for like a half hour, but no pressure, no pressure.
We've got nothing more important on our agenda, by the way.
These are the portfolios of insurers. They're all very prominent in the space, well capitalized, and have been on your program for quite a while. The other area that Johnny and Melanie asked us to speak to were some recommendations. Now, let me go back to the employment practices liability. We have received indicated pricing for a $2 million limit for $15,700, give or take, with a $100,000 deductible. And this would be for discrimination, harassment, or wrongful termination, wrongful hiring, wrongful promotion, so wrongful acts related to employment. There's a $3 million limit that is approximately $20,600. We would recommend the $2 million is sufficient.
The one that's up on our screen, though, is the cyber insurance quote?
Correct. I'm sorry. These numbers are fresh enough. They didn't get into the deck.
Okay, got it.
Should have said. So that's a separate consideration. Johnny, I don't know if you want to speak to it or if that's...
For the employment practice liability, again, staff just needs to look into that a little bit more concerning the conflicts of interest. And given it's within Greg's authority, I'd rather not have the board vote on that and give us time to purchase that. So before you is staff's recommendation to purchase or renew your fiduciary insurance, and then what John's going to go into is cyber insurance. So those two recommendations are solid, and everything else we will handle with staff. Is that clear?
So employment practices liability insurance, which seems like it would be relevant to the board as well, would be the same, with the same limits and the same protections as staff, or
Yes, it would just be agnostic because you never know who's going to get
doesn't
sued
mean-
until it
doesn't-
happens.
You don't know who. Okay.
So it's just a matter of limit against risk profile, against price and retention.
So Johnny, would you bring that back to the board, or would you just want discretion to make those decisions?
We could, it's within Greg's discretion because of the premium, but if you would like instead for us to bring it back in January, Greg, I'm sure we're open to that.
Well, from my perspective, if you guys decide that it's necessary and you want to do it, I think you should do it. I do want you to report it back to us one way or the other, because you guys may decide not to buy it and the board may overrule that. You guys buy it,
Then we will comment in January one way or another.
Would our umbrella drop down and, not drop down, but would it apply to an employment practices policy? Or would there be separate either excess or umbrella coverage for that? Or would we have a $2 million, are we talking about a $2 million limit and there's no insurance over the top of that?
David, the A side does not have an APL feature, correct?
No.
So the fiduciary coverage scope is not broad enough to include allegations of wrongful employment practices, including discrimination, harassment. And so it need to be a separate insurance, and you would not have excess capacity available under that separate fiduciary program either. So we will work with staff to tighten up the recommendations and go through the options.
Sure, today though, to be clear, staff is recommending that you renew your fiduciary insurance as well as you take a hard look at the cyber insurance quote before you. Okay?
All right.
On the cyber insurance, we went to market, approached a number of insurers. We had done so last year, and perversely, the number of cyber claims, and by cyber, primarily think of this as data breach. It doesn't even care if it's paper, it doesn't matter. It's just it's a label that's stuck, but it's electronic exposure generally is how to think of it. Strangely, the pricing went down versus last year because the underwriting model at this insurance company changed. So for a $5 million total aggregate limit with a $25,000 per occurrence deductible, the core coverage features, data and network liability don't seem terribly applicable. That's usually if your network gets hijacked by a bad actor and used as a pawn for malicious purposes.
David says that's impossible.
Okay.
Okay.
We can move on then.
Yeah.
One area that is very important is regulatory defense for regulatory investigations. In this area, if you have a breach, you could have 55 different regulatory authorities calling because you got 50 different states with totally different data protection laws and notification requirements. You've got numerous federal authorities and reconciling all that. And there's this rush to market, if you will, of public officials wanting to make sure that consumers are taken care of if they've been compromised on their personal financial information. So that can get expensive in a hurry. And it's not just for the breach having happened, it's also your breach response. If you have a poor breach response, we've seen regulatory fines and penalties just for how you handled it as well. Cyber extortion, there's a lot of that in the news where networks are locked up by bad actors and there's a ransom demand to unlock it. A big cost driver can be the data recovery and restoration. I don't think the business interruption loss, you're not a for-profit company, so it's not germane. The breach response is sort of the heart of this. And this is where, starting further down on the third sub-bullet, forensic analysis, figuring out what happened and how it happened and figuring out what to do about it, shore it up, clean it out, and make it safer going forward is difficult, very costly, time-consuming. And then you get into the things, of course, legal fees are going to come with this, but usually the way these work out is all the affected parties receive notifications that are driven by federal as well as state laws. And usually the way it's resolved individually is there's an effort to monitor credit for identity theft or, abuse of theft of funds, what have you, for that individual for a 2 to 3 year period that can range from high 100s per person in a massive pool to as much as 700 per person over that duration. There's also another feature that's important, and that is figuring out how to communicate on this and getting guidance from people who specialize in the area, making sure you've got attorney-client privilege, cloaking your analysis and your breach response. All of these features, I think the primary benefit personally of this insurance is you've pre-arranged this with top experts in their respective fields at pre-negotiated, heavily discounted, nationally negotiated rates. If you're in the moment trying to contract for these different services, and it doesn't go well. So that's the primary driver of why we recommend this insurance so universally. And I'll open it to questions.
There's no one in the queue, so let's
Hey,
continue.
Tanasi.
Oh,
I did my cybersecurity training that's mandated, so it's probably unnecessary.
I think so too. Absolutely. Yeah.
What is it? Why? How can they tax 3.2? And what would be the fees? How can they tax a premium?
Great point. Sorry, I should have elaborated on that. There's two types of insurance. There's what we call admitted and non-admitted. Admitted means it's been submitted to the State Department of Insurance to approve all the language in the policies, all the available endorsements, as well as the premium rate structure. In this area, it tends to almost entirely be non-admitted so that you separately negotiate all the features. The Department of Insurance hasn't reviewed it. It's not subject to the state's guarantee fund, but it gives enormous flexibility to the insurers to negotiate bespoke policies for different types of exposures. So most insurers haven't fooled with that process because the state can take years to turn it around, and this space is moving so fast. By the time they've approved it, they've moved on sometimes 2 different generations of policies, and the whole point was moot.
So how much are the fees?
Probably $250. I don't know. We'd have to look. Is it?
So it's probably closer
Oh,
to...
I'm sorry. 3.2%. That's the federal surplus. I'm sorry. The state California state surplus lines taxes and fees is 3.2% total. So that the 3.2% includes taxes and fees. There's no separate fees.
That irritates me almost as much as when I ended my lease on the last car I had, and they taxed that one.
There's always the ballot box next time.
Oh, I was on it.
All right. And I see that your presentation has come to a close. So what I think I understand is that the matter that we are voting on, if anybody has any other questions, is your recommendation is to purchase the fiduciary insurance, which is due, and then it's also to purchase the cyber insurance piece.
Yes, then
Are we gonna deal with those separately or together?
whatever you'd like. Steph has a pre-suggested.
Well, then let me tell you how I would handle this because I do this at home successfully. Cynthia, how would you like to handle it?
As it is right now.
We're going to do it together. Fantastic. Anybody have any questions before we vote?
Is there anybody who wants to lower the limits from 25 to 20? I'm not hearing anyone rushing to the door to do that. Okay.
All right. There being no motion on the floor, can I get someone to move this resolution? Moved by Charlie, seconded by Thomas.
Ready to vote?
All right.
All votes are in.
And that motion passes 6-0. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming out. All right. Moving on
Thank you for your time and
to.
attention, and thank you for serving our community.
Thank you. All right.
Is it Dave? David?
Yes.
Congratulations in the World Series. You look great.
I knew it was coming.
Awesome. All right, moving to old business. Staff's recommendation to deny Leonard Wilson's appeal. Please don't take that personally, Mr. Wilson. Come on up to the mic. Susan, if we can have you come up. This is an issue that came before us last meeting, and as I understand it, staff and Mr. Wilson met. The primary goal of that meeting was to first and foremost explain the calculation, how it was arrived at, those types of issues, and then to see if we can get an agreement on what specifically Mr. Wilson was appealing. And so, Mr. Wilson, you have a speaker slip. I'm going to have you go first. I love brevity, and so you've got your 3 minutes, but don't feel obligated to use all of it. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
All right. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, good morning. I'm Leonard Wilson. I'm only requesting 2 actions from the committee. Approve SDCERS' retirement calculations prepared for me on September 11th, 2017, and approve the methodology to calculate my portion of my drop account specified in SDCERS' letter dated June 8th, 2018. My retirement percentage. As directed from the September 13th, 2018 committee meeting, I met with Cynthia Queen, Johnny Tran, and Susan Youngflesh on September 24th. During this meeting, SDCERS reviewed retirement calculations with me. However, there was a discrepancy in the calculations, and SDCERS needed a day or 2 to vet the calculations. I told SDCERS that emailing me the calculations would be fine. On October 9th, the staff report was issued for this committee meeting, and still I had not received the calculations from the September 24th meeting. On October 22nd, Cynthia Queen emailed me calculations and mentioned that the calculations were summarized in an email sent to me in March of 2018. What was sent to me in March of 2018 was attachment 1A, staff report pages 20 through 23, which is a benefit estimate, not retirement calculations. And this document is in error because it specifies that I have 31.42385 years of SDCERS credits, and the October 22nd, 2018 calculations specify I have 31.04029 years of SDCERS service credits. I am requesting that the committee ratify the retirement calculations prepared by SDCERS on September 11th, 2017, specifying 73.85%. Staff report pages 33 through 44. My drop account. By email on April 3rd, 2018, I asked SDCERS to calculate my portion of my drop account. Staff report, page 19. On June 8th, 2018, I received a written response from SDCERS, staff report, page 7, appeal number 4. SDCERS' response specifically states, because your request does not affect your benefit, staff's decision in this matter is not appealable. I am not appealing SDCERS' response and methodology. I am requesting that the committee ratify the written response I received from SDCERS dated June 8th, 2018. As a member of SDCERS, I must rely on signed documents provided to me by SDCERS' retirement analysts and signed letters by SDCERS' leadership team members.
Mr. Wilson, we're at 3 minutes.
Okay,
I give
this
you about.
concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Susan?
Thank you. As was stated, we met with Mr. Wilson in September per the board's direction. We clarified the calculations and the appeal. The appeal that he has set forth today and when we met with him hasn't changed from the last time. What he's seeking is for this board to ratify, as he states, calculations that are inconsistent with a court order. The court order puts in the order how to divide his retirement benefit and also states how to divide the drop monies. What staff is asking is that the appeal of Mr. Wilson be denied and that staff be allowed to follow the court order on how to divide his community property benefit.
Val, you're in the queue.
Yep. First of all, I want to thank both staff and Mr. Wilson because I really pushed to have this continued to today and to get more information. And the presentation, the staff report at this point, I think is complete. It answers my questions. It explains what Mr. Wilson's appeal is and is not. And it explains all the facts surrounding what happened in a way that I can follow. So I am satisfied that I understand it at this point, which I didn't last time, and I appreciate that. And I don't see any basis to do anything here legally other than deny this appeal. So I'm going to vote to deny the appeal, even though I wanted to make sure that we had a full record and I understood what the appeal was. Now that I have all that, I don't see how the board can do anything other than deny the appeal.
Are there any other questions? So one additional piece of information that I just want to verify. Do I understand correctly that Mr. Wilson had received 2 prior estimates of his benefit before the one that he's asking the board to ratify? Did I understand that correctly?
That's correct. He received a estimate in March 2016 at 59.4% and an estimate in August 2017 at 60.98%. Both of those were before his counseling meeting in September of 2017.
And the percentage, just remind the trustees again, what is the actual percentage that the calculation comes out to?
The calculation of his retirement benefit should be 64.81%.
Okay. So just so we're all really clear, SERS is just simply following a court-ordered qualified domestic relations order, and I don't think we have any authority to change that. So anyway, if there's no other questions, can we move to approve the resolution? Or can I get a motion to approve the resolution? Okay. Motion has been moved by Val. It's been seconded by Roberta.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And that passes unanimously 6-0. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, for being here. Thank you, Susan. And Susan, I think you're actually on the next one, aren't you? The report on overpayments to members exceeding $10,000? Nope. No. Okay. Well, you're the one that circled it on your sheet. God, all right. No, that's, thank you. All right, so I guess we can move on to staff report by divisions. As I understand it, we're going to discuss 3 of them. Item number 1, item number 2, and item number 4. So Cynthia, if you could start us off with member services.
Is there anything that's not in your report that you'd like to talk about, or is it all there? Damn.
But that would lead me.
So, please.
That would lead me to say thank you for reading my report, Val. Good morning, everyone. I do have some additional news that I wanted to share outside of the report. SDCERS will hold our annual membership meeting on Friday, November 30th from 11 to noon in the Balboa Park Club Ballroom. I'm formally inviting all of you right now. We hold this meeting each year to share with our members what's going on with the pension system, and we're very pleased that our key message that we're sharing is that your pension system is very stable, very well governed, and is investing for the long haul. In years past, there had been more concerns about the status of the system, and so we would have a larger crowd at the annual meeting with concerns. As we have done such a great job to govern this system very well, our attendance has become more comfortable. People are more comfortable with what's going on. So we really work hard to present an interesting theme. The theme this year will be Then and Now. We're looking at the past history of pension systems because Thanasi, what could be more interesting than that? And then how things are in the future. It's very interesting to see some of the changes. So we have an excellent presentation planned. I did suggest that prior to the formal presentation that Thanasi and I would do a dance routine and comedy routine. That was, however, denied by Valentine Hoy and your wife. So we'll be sticking with the standard presentation, which includes these fine people here. And
I didn't say you couldn't do it. I just said I wouldn't come.
and that mattered because Val is one of the key speakers. So we appreciate that. This is a big annual meeting, but I wanted to stress the importance of the regular meetings that we hold every month, week in and week out, with all of our stakeholders and the plan sponsors. We had excellent interactions with our retirees in the last 2 months with presentations by Marcel and Greg and Liza to the Retired Employees Association, Retired Fire and Police Association, and working closely with the Retiree Issues Task Force. Additionally, I do want to emphasize that a number of the board rule changes and items that we discussed earlier, we have an excellent working relationship with the plan sponsors, where we met in advance with them to hash out situations that we wanted to resolve and move forward on, and it was done in conjunction with them. So I'm very pleased that we have that relationship where we can look at matching our board rules to what's actually going on with the plan sponsors. So following tomorrow's meeting, we will of course have updates to share with those plan sponsors on what we've done. So I appreciate everyone's efforts with that. If you would like to come and see Val do an excellent job at the annual meeting, we would love to have the rest of you there, but it is not a required meeting for you because we appreciate all of your work. Thank you.
I understand that the call center is still doing fantastic.
They are doing a fantastic job. We've had a slight increase in the calls in November, and we are sticking to our goal right now at the average wait time of 19 seconds.
Awesome. And then the last issue is I understand we have 2 new members because we are losing somebody. Is that correct? Did I understand that?
Yeah, we have had some staff changes. We had internal promotions, and we have brought on a new person, and I will be introducing you to them once they successfully complete their training portion of the very important job.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Item number 2, benefits administration. Marcel, I think you are going to discuss the Public Pension Coordinating Council. The award for the Public Pension Coordinating Council for our efforts in funding and administration.
Thank you. I actually wasn't going to discuss that, but I'm happy to. Of course, now I have to find it in my notes.
Huh,
There
Greg,
were
that's
some-
interesting. She wasn't going to discuss that.
No.
All right, just checking. Good.
There were other things I wanted to discuss, but the Public Pension Standards Award is very important. So we did receive the award. It is for meeting professional standards in plan funding and administration. It goes through 5 different areas. Do we have a comprehensive benefit program, which of course we do? Do we have an actuarial evaluation performed, which we do? An audit, does our investments division have written policies and procedures on what they do? And how do we communicate with our members? So in all of those areas, we met the requirements, and so we received the recognition award for administration. There also is a recognition award for funding, which looks at being at either 100% funded or our members, our plan sponsors always making their contributions, which they do, and then having a 5-year plan on how we're going to meet those criteria if we don't have them. But since we do have one of them in place, we don't need that. So we did receive that award. Very excited to get that, and we will continue to apply for that award each year. I did want to mention something else, though. 2 things. One is, I did mention in my report that Fong Nguyen from my staff has been conducting biweekly trainings. He initially started with those trainings for the benefits administration staff and has recently expanded them to include health staff, member services staff, and legal staff. So that has been great to have those refresher courses of all the pieces that we look at on a regular basis. That dovetails into my second comment. In Johnny Tran's report, he talks about that this meeting was the last one for the triennial review of board charters, policies, and board rules. And one of the things that staff has been looking at very carefully over the last year, actually last year and a half, at every board meeting since July of 17, you have had board rules in front of you. So staff has been looking very carefully at those to make sure that our process narratives and our board rules are supported by what's in the plan documents, and if there are gaps, to make sure that those gaps have been addressed. So through that process, we did introduce 4 new board rules over the last year to make sure that we are covered. And I do want to acknowledge and thank the staff that was so instrumental in that, which was, besides the legal staff, who was their job, beyond that, it was Sandra Clausen, Cynthia Queen, Monty Pareto, Fong Nguyen, Christina Tamayo, and Bonnie Schmidt. So I do appreciate very much their in-depth review of those policies as we went through this process.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you very much. And thank you to staff for your work on those amendments.
And staying awake through the whole process.
Yeah, good Lord. How much coffee did we go through? Was our budget, Ted, did our coffee budget go up during that process, or was it still? All right. We're gonna skip over legal and compliance because Johnny is way over his 3 minutes, and we're gonna go into information technology. David, I was hoping you would come up because this is the best part. David never asked to talk. David never asked me to do anything. But David apparently there's an award that IT was involved with, and I think David should share that information with us.
We did. Our peers of the MISAC group, which are the Municipal Information Systems Association of California, awarded us with the Quality in IT Practices Award. So we're very proud to accept that award, and we will also apply for that each year moving forward.
And I take it that means that our vote previously on the cyber insurance was completely unnecessary as a result of the award.
No.
No. Okay. David, thank you very much. All right, and Ted is over his 3 minutes, so we're going to skip over finance and the trust financials, unless there is something that a trustee has questions about.
I heard Ted won the Congressional Medal of Honor, and I'd like to hear about it.
Got it.
You know, this is recorded, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. We do need the fiduciary insurance now more than ever, as you can plainly see, so we're in good shape. Any questions and comments from any of the trustees? Any non-docketed items? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Anybody?
So moved.
All right. Val's moved it. We don't need a second. Thank you, everybody. Let's leave.